a person has to bind by those rules and have basically a set of standards that one has to follow when you are basically making a promise. So that is what is the basic underlining regarding the fact of promises. And yeah, let's go forward. So yeah, just take a moment to congratulate yourself and others because you guys have like win this particular game, game one. Okay, and now let's proceed on to game two. So if by any chance you guys are using promises, then how are you actually using it? Has it been as you mentioned about using in some part of your service? Okay, so think that just for the interaction of creating threads, having multiple asynchronous tasks to run in, and what are these kind of tasks when you use promises in the code itself?
So in the code, it's not just about synchronous thread.
Sure.
It is also maintaining the synchronous. So first, I create. Okay, you need to do this. When you are done, he needs to do this. He needs to do this. Like
Sure.
suppose tomorrow I'm conducting conference. Okay,
Yeah.
I tell you you do this.
Yes.
Once he is done, you do that. You do.
Chaining of the events.
I chain them,
Exactly.
and I mean it's not just chaining. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
okay, once you're done sequencing,
Mhm.
and also what input that you can expect, what output that you need to give him. Then
Sure.
after that, I sit back and okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
On the date when it comes, I schedule
Okay.
it. Okay, go ahead. So in the I will also we have something similar like okay when the test service comes in, you go to database and you get this. So same thing.
Okay.
So any kind of operation that can go in, it's like operation as well as.
So basically, concurrency and chaining when it comes to implementing promises in our code. What else? What else? How you guys use promises? Have you heard of the thing saying that callback hell is one thing that you can see in code, maybe in Node.js, and how do you deal with it as of now? Sorry.
You just call me using normal callback.
Sure. So there you encounter callbacks. So how are you, have you implemented a promises solution in your current implementation by any chance?
Promises, I guess, is part of ES6, right? That
Not actually.
Promise is
Yeah.
just a concept. There are already libraries which are available.
yeah, library external. Yeah. So basically, it's a synchronization tool after हम दो processes एक को wait करना पड़ रहा है दूसरे के लिए.
Sure. Yeah.
And फिर जब
Exactly.
काम करते
Yeah.
हैं, so you have to give the data
Yes.
on whatever.
Yes. Yes. Sure.
So I've done this while I was in college. So we need to make a multiplayer game. So there are two players, those process and different systems to serve.
Sure.
Yeah, so that then both stores.
Mhm.
Snake game is equal.
Sure.
But then we need to synchronize it.
Yeah.
So that was
So maybe that might be a pop-up pattern in implementation, where you publish events and that there is a subscriber which sees that. But maybe promises can be think of it in a sense where you have a commitment and you say whenever you have got this particular thing, just notify me, or if it's rejected, then do it in this particular way. So maybe the pops up in a way will is actually implementing promises, and that's how you can. And yes, that can be an implementation of how you have done it. What else? Any other way? You are from the front end only, so you might have used the promises.
So yeah,
how do
we
you
actually
use
in our application heavily use promise. We normally use
Okay.
so jQuery
Sure.
is
Yeah.
promise.
Mhm.
Then we leave it. That way you will put the question.
Okay. Okay.
So what happens like every module need a service from server.
Okay.
So is
Mhm.
first,
Mhm.
but not render anything. So it has to wait for
Sure. Yeah.
the
The
things
module
will
to
come.
load up
Yeah.
actually, and then only.
जितने भी
initiate.
मतलब उसके कॉलबैक
True.
उसकी जो
Okay.
उसके लिए ठीक है ना बाद में the module will start rendering the things
Exactly.
then function and the other things
Okay.
and apart from that हम in our application like there is a Ajax call for country and states.
Mhm.
Let's example.
Sure.
Okay. Now there are so many modules.
Sure.
This way that will be used.
Mhm.
Now, now when we are implemented in a promises way,
Mhm.
कि
Only when the promise gets resolved, then only you can see that
So
particular
that
data.
some notice जो अगर if we want
Okay.
and that data is not available,
Sure.
then it will
Okay. Fetch it and then bring it
fetch
back
it and
and
bring
then
it back.
resolve it.
जितने भी वेट कर रहे हैं ठीक है ना उसको वो डाटा देगा
Exactly.
एंड आफ्टर दैट
Sure.
जो आपका प्रॉमिस रिजॉल्व होने के बाद भी अगर जब इफ एवरी दैट इज रिजॉल्विंग इमीडिएटली
True. True. Basically, what we have understood is that promises can be used in chaining, they can be used in sequencing, they can be used in actually gathering. Now let's move on forward. Let's take on for the basic understanding of me to actually acknowledge as to what audience we are getting into as of now, and to get a feel as to what things you have worked upon or you are facing problems with in promises, and so that we can take up in discussion forward. Okay, so yeah, game three is what do you understand when you see bad, better, good, and best when I say regarding this particular conversation. So you can take it as oh sorry.
better
Yeah, my
is
bad.
priority.
Sure. Yeah.
No.
Sure. So bad, good, better, and perfect. I mean, what do you think of bad? How can you implement something in the bad? Uh, is it something that is not implemented actually, where it can be implemented? Do you think it is bad? Do we have a conversation saying, okay, yeah, if something good is present already and you're not maybe it's bad, so that can be taken as bad. Then what is good? By using it the way a person does when a library has exposed it. Do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is going to type it.
True. True.
Suppose some system is already written.
Okay.
It may not always be good to write.
Yes.
At the end of the day, money matters.
Sure. Exactly.
So,
Yep.
what I feel is at the time of when you're writing, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Your code is extendable.
True.
Say
True.
normal code.
True.
So, and as you said in your first, if while I'm writing the code, if nobody is actually maintaining one system per client, so you will be moving out of the company at most at least 5 years. So when the next guy comes and looks at the code, he shouldn't be looking for who.
Exactly. Yes.
Understand? It should be like a novelty. So that's what these two things actually. If I want, if somebody added a bit to my code, actually you can feed it.
Sure.
When you're looking at it.
Yeah, sure.
Or you just give it to the next person, and if you code like an novel, it's a good code. Those two other.
True. True. A great definition, I would say. What about good and best? If you can think of maybe doing a bit further, going a bit further deep into what you're currently doing and actually seeing as to what all implications can happen if you're going it this way and maybe think of it a bit forward, the best practices that are available as of now and then you can implement in your code good way. And best is something that we can say is something that we can look out for, we can strive to achieve, though it's not defined, it's undefined as of now. Okay, so let's take it forward with these definitions of good, bad, better, and best. Okay, and yeah, so this is what Morpheus tells us that what if I told you that promises are much more than that, much more than what we have discussed as of now. There is chaining and then sequencing, removing callback hills, and a bunch of other things that are simply mentioned on their website saying, yeah, this is what promises is for. So yeah, let's go forward with it and let's see the history of promises as to how promises came in place. Because promises have been in place for quite some time. Maybe EcmaScript 4 is what I can think of. EcmaScript 4 or 5 when jQuery came in and gave the promises, and then that way when you do in $.ajax, it basically returns your promise and you can use it any way you want to. So it's not in EcmaScript 6 specification that promises came in, but this concept has been in before, and it's going to be in the mainstream in the coming EcmaScript 6 specification. So yeah. So why do you think actually promises came in? There are multiple reasons, as we talked about, that how promises are implemented. But yeah, these were the actual reasons as to why there were issues regarding the different things, and that's what promises came up to be as a solution, and that's what we are going to discuss. So yeah, callback hell is first one of them. Uh, as you can see that this guy is making fun of us and saying, so we put callbacks in your callback, so you can call back when you call back. And it is basically true because when you're actually making a callback, it's basically this phenomena that triggers it, and you can't actually, avoid it. But in your code, maintain a consistency where when you're doing it, it actually doesn't become so complicated to, thinking of it. So this is the parameter doom, which is a callback hell. You can actually see that callbacks, for example, when you do a user.find, then that result comes in and then it sees if an error is thing comes in. So there are a sequence of events, and depending upon whether it's an error or it's a success callback, this particular thing, executes. But when thinking of a perspective of a developer who's coming in for the first time, that's a shit scary thing for him to actually see this code and maybe manipulate it, extend it, or even read it by any chance in maybe X amount of time, right? So
maybe for the same person.
Sorry.
Maybe for the same person who wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you're coming in maybe after 2 or 3 days, you might have the same.
And there is a bug. Bugs will definitely be there when you want to debug.
Exactly. No doubts. Yeah. True. So what else? So how else can we solve this particular issue where there are asynchronous JavaScript callbacks, and you want to have, you don't want to implement callbacks. What else you can do is basically have async as false, and then it synchronous call which kicks in. At that point of time, your browser will freeze and it will stop responding until the time this Ajax is complete. Nothing will happen. The user interaction will completely fail, but it basically is a solution for avoiding callback hills. As you say, I dare you. If you write this particular piece of code, async is false, then maybe God will be with you. Sure. So handling concurrent Ajax calls. There are multiple practices, or there are multiple situations where you have to actually achieve multiple concurrent Ajax calls. For example, you can think of a situation where you have multiple data sources, okay, and using those data sources, you have to render something on your client side. Now, depending upon that, whether the last call that you made came in first or the first one came in last, there might be different, chain of events that kick in, right? And there might be X number of events that can happen. For example, the first coming last, the second coming at the last, or the second coming first. So there are multiple things, and if you have to have this particular way where you have to render the data from any of the source whenever it comes in some implementation in place so that you can actually use it and use basically concurrent Ajax calls or the data sources in your implementation. So that is also the case why promises are there, and we can basically discuss them in detail as to how they help us. Okay.
I can give you a scenario for
Sure.
promises. Which you can solve. Use later.
Sure. Okay. Okay.
So we group packages, right?
Yeah.
So I was working for a company called Elma. So what they offer is package.
Sure.
So first you choose a package to go. So in the page where you want to, so there we set. So we get packages from one place. Let's say Holiday Inn.
Sure.
That's a company which offers packages.
Yes. Yes.
So from there we get packages. So after that, once we get the packages, while a user is looking at the details, we keep loading other stuff. Under the package, we need to first get what are the flights are available as a choice for the package. So multiple airlines are available in Europe now.
Yes.
So you need to get that. So once you have multiple airlines, you need to talk to the airlines to get which is an international standard. So once you get that, price might be bold. So you need to send. There is something called sell request.
Okay.
So as per standard, they call it as sell request. So you need to send a sell request to individual. Then you need to send to the airlines.
Okay.
So A rated.
Yeah.
Send availability request.
Okay. Sure.
Send request
Exactly.
you cannot send immediately.
Yes.
You need to send availability request.
Sure,
if it is available, then you need to send sell request.
Yes.
Then if it is a sell request,
Yes.
then you need to render something. So there are multiple steps. First, I talk to the package provider. Then I send an availability request. Then I send a sell request. Then I render that.
Exactly.
So in meanwhile, after each request comes back, we need to do like. So first we get the package details. We need to then while we are sending the availability request, we start rendering those things, showing a loading button for price and availability. So if then when availability comes, we disable the checkboxes for those particular airlines. The ones that comes, we show the price.
Okay.
So at each step, once you get something, you want to do something, and again you want to send another request.
Exactly.
So
and there might be multiple airlines that you might be querying for at the same
so
time.
it is like this.
Exactly. Yeah.
So start with one request.
So n number of concurrent requests that are coming in, and you have to cater to each one of them.
So it's like a so at that time it's in 2008 9.
Okay.
So at that time we don't know promises, so we implemented all.
Oh sure. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
But in Java.
Yes. Okay. Oh, so that was backend.
Yes, we did it in backend. So front end wasn't.
Threads you have implemented it. The concurrent digits was and then.
So same you can think of now for front end because.
True.
It's a true.
Yeah. Sure. It totally depends upon the implementation, and implementation might differ. So the underlying logic might be the same.
I mean, I'm just giving you a problem.
Yeah, sure. So there are multiple ways that you can think of it. I mean, every industry has its own thing where it's fetching data from different data sources and then combining them, and basically when at the time of the basically see as to what first data came in, because you have to reduce the user's perceiving loop time, right? Because we have come in like maybe 3 milliseconds or 4 milliseconds, and or maybe even less than 500 milliseconds to say when you have made an AJAX call and you're getting the want to that user to basically understand that we'll take to actually load data from every data source and then only render it. User actually wait.
So that's how we did it. So basically Java developers are really bad at JavaScript.
Okay.
But the backend developers it's the same story.
I mean, any Ruby Rails, any strong language, strongly type and everything.
Exactly.
Whereas JavaScript is not a strongly type. And I see a language which is more flexible and which can flow like a water. And where I'm good with working with solids, I can't work with solids. Right? So it's just we are, as I said, I think so. So we send all these request true false and we render it.
Yes.
So that's why I started.
Nice.
Sure.
Yeah.
Client.
Yes.
So because of my so do not confuse. Yeah.
True.
Venkat Subramaniam, he's a very good.
Yes.
Then some.
Okay. I remember meeting him in one of the Agile conferences.
He's all right.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah.
What else? When error handling becomes a bit more complicated, we have written any piece of JavaScript code, both I mean either on client side or server side. We know for a fact that there are different ways you handle errors. The way you handle it inside the function only, or you have callbacks that are associated with that particular thing, or you have a global listener for a particular except by the code itself. So that is how different people implement it. But yeah. Promises also allows you to have a way of error handling, which is a bit more complicated when you're not using promises. So what else? Yes. So to say the fact, yes, I think, and I acknowledge it myself. And when I was exposed to this, it was seriously, I mean, a breathtaking moment for me. First of all, to understand that this can be that simpler, and then and inside that it should be. Let's just discuss it more so that everyone is at the same path and able to use it the same way that one should. Okay, so we know promises that we love promises. A lot of us have implemented it, but what now? What should we go forward with? So as a code says, it basically says that asynchronicity isn't just for concurrency, and promises aren't just for XHR, that is XML HTTP request. They are not just for talking to different services and having a callback where when a service gets completed, only then you are able to think of it. Promises have a lot more use cases that you can think of and that you can go forward with in your implementation when you're using, as you can see in the coming examples. So let's move forward. Yes, exactly. So anything that you think is synchronous and can be done in an asynchronous way, you can basically implement a wrapper around it. With promises, I'll give you an example regarding this. Yeah, with not workers, but a different implementation or a different API that was looking forward to a similar implementation. Had this thing by using callbacks. Earlier they had callbacks, but now they have implemented promises.
Basically, by asking for workers is
Sure.
promises. I basically want to make, when I'm saying asynchronous, I want to improve the performance and all that.
Exactly.
To branch in one thread. Promise create a new thread when it is running a.
No, promises is just a design pattern, you can say actually. When you're implementing a solution, it actually has the concept of callbacks, of managing the callbacks in a better way, to put it simply.
Right, I mean the concept.
Yeah.
So is there any implementation of the concept which actually uses workers, which
I mean, there might be several libraries. I haven't used them before, though. If you have to write one for yourself, if you understood the concept of promises, you can definitely go forward with any of the implementation or write an implementation by yourself. Okay. So
I think with workers you don't need promises.
I mean, but he wants to have it that way, so that
is, so the coordination.
I think worker has that mechanism, that worker.
Okay.
In this company, I think that is
so
there in
promises
worker also.
are there to manage multiple workers.
Okay, you want to manage multiple workers.
Yeah, he wants to have a separate module for himself, where use a library which talks to workers, and you can simply provide some function that you want to execute by that particular worker, and you don't want to actually code, the worker code by yourself, saying that yeah, now instantiate a new worker and see for when it is done with its own
Something
work.
that actually abstracts out.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Sure. So the first thing is like. This is how we can actually use it in other different ways apart from just thinking of it from the XML HTTP perspective. So one is building UI interactions. You have different UI components that communicate with each other via promises. So if I give you a simple example, that would be that you have got a particular form, and when a form gets filled, you have to actually see whether a user exists or not. Okay. You have to make another AJAX call, and when that AJAX call tells you whether that particular user is in existence as of now or not, or can be created, you have to take an action whether you want to proceed or not. Okay, so you can think of it this way: when gets submitted to you, okay, you can either take upon a different function, saying, "Okay, yeah, callback," you can actually say, "Yeah, this particular user is not in." Who are you want to, okay, and that's how you can go forward with it. That your core logic of your modules actually extracted into a different module altogether, right? Because earlier you were doing adding a user module, but now when another you have to have that particular thing shifted into a different module altogether, which is just a condition. So this is what something you don't want to look out for. What you can do is basically you can implement a promises implementation in the other module, saying that you want to resolve that particular promise, interacting with two different modules. The promise back to the when that you say that promise to being resolved. And at that point of time, that other module will basically add that particular user then and there in the then callback. So that way you won't have to actually extract out the process of creating a user from another module, and instead have the things which are specific to a module in its body only. You don't actually have to implementation. It's very accommodating when you're actually some libraries where you don't want to have sharing of in some libraries, and you don't want to give the accessibility simply, and you can have the same scenario. So this is how you can do it. When you're building UI interactions, that's what even I did while implementing a similar solution in a SaaS application that required this particular stuff. What Wingify does it, message passing between iframe and window. So if you know of this implementation, it's basically a post message API that is used between the window and the iframe that allows you to communicate between the two when you are actually wanting to send some data, or you want to have some things in implementation from one to the other. For example, from the main window, you want to actually tell to the iframe that, hey, I want to your iframe to a different URL. How can you actually do it? This is post message API, but you want to have a similar library in place at the both ends so that it's able to understand as to what things you are telling it to. You can think of it this way, that a post message API allows you to send just a string. But if you've implemented a library which allows you to actually get that string from the post message API and then evaluate it, allowing you to basically implement some function, that way you can have an cases. And the way Wingify is doing it is via please, which is basically a request response based wrapper that they have implemented using promises. And post message API that was through callbacks, but now using promises, they are able to have a synchronous code, a similar synchronous code which is written used by that library, and they are able to use it in a much better. What else? So increasing consistency in module behavior, as I discussed before. So it's an implementation which is not just specific to the UI interaction, any module that you're working in. There are two different modules altogether, and you want to communicate with them. This is a very good implementation that you can sort out for. Okay, and this is how you can go forward with. But apart from that, if you are thinking of actually API for your client, also I would recommend you to have a promises implementation in place instead of having a callback. Eventually, it can lead to a callback help.
So basically, where I see given with the UI interaction and the module interaction,
Yes,
I think this is more generic. UI is nothing but one of the modules.
exactly. Yes.
So what you're saying, like if I want to keep the code in my module only, so
Sure.
I can even return a function. So, but what we are not getting the function is what about other scenarios? If particular fails, what needs to be done? So
Exactly. So for that, we have to pass in other
that's
more
why
functions.
a promise.
Yes, exactly.
That's why a promise
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a more bigger wrapper
Yes,
than.
yes. So when you're passing into the arguments, you are basically passing more functions altogether. So instead of so when you actually see functions, and when you define a function over there, you say arguments. But now in the arguments, you are actually passing in functions along with them also. So this is something that is a bit conflicting when you're thinking of it, because arguments think of values instead of passing more and more functions. Think of it in this way, then maybe promises are the best solution
Right,
to go forward with it.
it is, we can pass what I can chain it.
Exactly, you can chain it. You can do whatever you want to on top of that.
These functions I can.
Yes.
I can,
Exactly, and instead of the functions to be passed in as argument, you can simply have them through trying the promises itself. Ways that you can do that.
But in simple scenario, I would suggest send back needs to be done.
Yes.
In a simple scenario, I would still suggest instead of promise, go with the function.
Okay.
The function is more simple thing than a promise.
To tell the truth, in today's implementation, 4 lines of code that you write simply do is to.
It's not just lines of code. It's not just about lines of code. It's more of why a promise, because a function in sense than a promise there. So
Okay,
it's just a piece of. I mean, suppose once I just wanted to tell my colleague that if you want to person for this there are some cases.
okay.
So if you just log a message,
Okay.
there is no error scenario.
Sure.
So in that case, that's it. Log a function which.
Okay.
So in some simple scenarios, still a function is better than promise.
Okay.
Because promise is a workflow. In the function can be.
Exactly.
Is a workflow.
So if I have to give a counter for this argument, I would say that I can think of promises as more readable. By what I actually want to say is that if you have a thing where you say instantiate a service, okay, and you're passing in a function. So if another developer is coming in and he sees that particular instantiate worker and then sees the actual function, he might not be what that anonymous function is doing, but instantiate worker dot then. So basically, it means that after this instantiated, after then only do some particular piece of work.
We are sending a extended dollar. So there is some concept called final, right? In Java. So if you want to do something simple, okay, this is it. There is no extension after that.
Sure.
So in those simple scenarios, I feel, and you can.
Okay.
Somebody cannot do extend your promise.
Okay.
You want to keep it data like final keyword if you want to go in Java.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you want to do something, so getting your
okay.
If you don't, he just want the promise to be executed. No other function is alright.
Okay.
So then he can modify. So it will be. I mean, it just depends on the case. Basically, I say like.
So you're saying that it might not be a problem. I mean, a situation where you don't have to think about error callback, and you just want to think about a success callback to be there.
Yeah, it just something needs to be done.
So you don't want to even think of error callbacks, but if I have to say that it's a bit more readable, I just want to say that it signifies that it's a kind of success. It's not a failure, because if you say dot catch after that, it might be some exception is from this particular stuff, and that's how it's catching it, or it's catching that particular error, and that's how it's going forward with it. But to me, if I'm coming for the first time and I'm seeing your initiate work and you have passed in a function, I don't know whether that actually triggers in when a success callback or when an error is thrown, right? So into the definition of that particular initiate worker, I'll be. Though if you want to see it from the first glimpse of code, you can actually wire the implementation and simply do it that way.
In some scenarios, like callbacks is called multiple times.
Sure. Yes.
So like we have map function. Like there's some array, some objects. I just pass an anonymous function
exactly
in the map, and that will be executed. It read over the array. Like in that case, we don't. We don't require promises.
Sure. So basically, in that particular case, promises might not be a good, but is something that is events, where we actually signify as to what thing is coming in, and depending upon that, you can have multiple any implementation that you want to. So promises is not the right thing to go forward with it in your custom implementation. The better is your case. So I mean you can do it in the specifications, and it's a much better implementation for this particular use case.
Events.
Yeah.
Are you talking about server-side events?
No, it's client-side also. Yeah. So these things were all that I want to say regarding why actually promises. These are the best use cases. Regarding that callback hell issue, I would say that callback hell is definitely when you're events in nested callbacks by simply having dot then append after each one of the other through a solution for avoiding, and that's what you can do. If you are having multiple use cases where you want to actually rely upon multiple promises to be resolved, in that case there are libraries, as you said, and you are using as of now. For example, Q, that allows you to have different implementations. For example, q.all or q.raise or q.first, which allows you to actually see as to what promise has come in first, and depending upon that, take the suitable action. So yeah, that way you can also resolve callback. If you want, like we can still discuss it in detail if you have a code in place, and then like just see whether what thing is like being an issue. Sure. So the next is if you're currently working upon or using as a medium or in an implementation, then how you can actually migrate to actually from the jQuery promises to actually using the EcmaScript 6 specification promise, or the actually use promises that are up to that particular specification. So there are a lot of that come in when using jQuery promises, and you have to take care of, for example, handling. When done in case of jQuery promise, so let's think of it this way: that you have passed in a function or you have called a function, and you have returned a promise. Though inside that function, if an error throws up, at that point of time, it won't get catched in the fail call of that particular promise. It will basically a global error that will come up, and that's how you have to resolve it. So that is not how it should be, because it is very specific to that implementation, and promise can take care of it, right? So this is why one of the reasons. The second is chain. So when you are chaining using JavaScript promises, using jQuery promises, so a jQuery promise through .then returns the object itself and not the promise, so that you can promises together. Okay, so if you want to have chaining, then you're better like want to migrate to using Q or the EcmaScript 6 specification promise. Okay, or any other library that allows you to implement the same. I'll share some more resources so that you can as to what libraries you can use and like start using it then and there. Then comes asynchrony. Asynchrony allows you to so it's basically asynchronous events that fire in. For example, if you have written a function, okay, and then in the done then callback you have executed a statement. So there might be multiple occurrences in jQuery where .then can be fired before or after the next execution line. This is also promises, and which is something that you don't want to have when you're writing your piece of code. Then comes single versus multiple values. Single versus multiple values is the result or the output that has come up from your implementation or when you resolve something. So in case of jQuery promises, it comes in as a single array. So if you want to have three values, you have to have three arguments in your success callback. Instead, in your queue callback, in your queue promises or the better implementation of promises, you have an array, and by that you can basically reference as to what parameter you want to look out for. So this is a better implementation. Then comes deferred promises and resolvers. When you say jQuery, so jQuery has the concept of promises implemented it in 4 lines, where it says first you instantiate a deferred object, okay, and then that deferred object has a resolve or a reject or even dot progress, which allows you to see whether that which allows you to instantiate an action on that particular promise, whether it has resolved or not, or whether it has been rejected, or what is the state of that particular thing. And when you're done with all, and before you're done with any of these actions, you actually return the promise of that particular deferred object. But the thing is, if by any chance you use that particular promise, okay, or you use the deferred object, and then you want to resolve it, so that is a serious flaw in jQuery, which allows you to actually use the promise itself to resolve or reject that particular promise. Okay, which is not the case in the implementation of or the promise in the EcmaScript 6 specification. So,
So as I told you said,
yeah,
jQuery. I mean, we should not use jQuery.
exactly. You should not. Yeah, you implementing it now. You must not use it, because then moving on to standard and you don't have to think about browser dependency, then you can straight away use EcmaScript 6 specification instead of relying upon the jQuery prompt.
So the Vue or any other frameworks is compatible directly with the
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So the specification that is laid out by the community itself by the name implementation of JavaScript promises, and then it became a draft in the to be.
So your browser supporting promises.
So this thing is already in place. Okay. Regarding the EcmaScript 6 implementation, it is still something. If I know it correctly, then Chrome has implemented it.
May not be complete EcmaScript, but
Okay.
about the promises.
About the promises, yes, Chrome has implemented it. Earlier, it was a flag.
Almost every browser implemented except our lovely Internet Explorer.
Sure.
I10 and I11 both.
Okay. For sure. But
IE is
We have libraries like Q libraries similar to jQuery in which
if there is already something browser provided, doesn't cover that.
exactly. Yeah, but then you have to think of IE9 or IE8 or 7, whatever.
So IE10 and 11 has it.
Sure. So let's go on to details as to what's new in EcmaScript 6. So if you have been following, then creators are coming in EcmaScript 6 specification. When tying up with promises, you can have a great use cases come up. It's still a lot more to explore because these are something that you can think of it in parallel with Ruby. For example, procs and lambdas, and you can compare it with the same and have a different implementation the way you want to. Then comes unifying asynchronous APIs. The fetch API is going to be a replacement of XML HTTP request. XML HTTP request
like only IE
11
has this Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, iOS, Android, everything has.
What is the other red one?
Thus Opera Mini.
Yeah, Opera. Sure. So XML HTTP request replaced by the fetch API, and fetch API, which is the JavaScript implementation, is going to return you a promise. So if you don't want to use maybe a library, for example, jQuery or any other library that allows you to make a service request. So using the native JavaScript implementation, you can have a promise and the corresponding code that you want to write. Then comes the EcmaScript 6 API for programmatically importing modules based on promise. So as you said that you are already doing it one of your frameworks. So that way, when modules are specified in JavaScript implementation, they are also going to have promises in place where when you're loading modules, you can actually see that when a module is loaded, at that point of time, the promise gets resolved and then you can take the corresponding action.
Apart from that, we are having a singleton service also.
Okay.
So that create a single object of.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
there we use promise also.
Okay.
For
So any specific use case for the particular singleton service that you have created?
like see in one of page, like there's a one order page.
Okay.
There are multiple tabs.
Okay.
Okay. So each tab is one module.
Okay.
Okay. One UI component. They are totally independent.
Okay.
Now these are the UI component, but underlying they need to share the same data set.
Oh,
Same
okay.
like
Okay.
that
Sure, yeah.
detail service.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So what's every tab
Mhm.
call singleton manager
Mhm.
that I need an object
Okay.
of order details, kind of order detail.
Yes.
I need an object.
Okay.
So that singleton service manager internally use promises
Okay.
to check whether that this order detail service is initialized
Mhm.
properly or not, because
Okay.
user can land up on any tab,
Sure. Yeah.
and that any tab can require
Mhm.
the data.
Okay. Sure. Yes.
Why did you create a service manager? Sorry, this is a-
Okay. Yeah.
Why did you create a singleton service manager?
Why did you create a singleton service manager?
Angular, Angular. Oh, okay, first I need to ask. Are you using Angular?
No, I don't like Angular at all.
Okay. Which framework are you using?
No, we mostly use plain JavaScript. We use micro frameworks like for routing, for two-way binding. Sometimes we use
So,
Rabbit.js.
are you using any IOC framework?
Yeah, MVC frameworks we use very similar framework like Backbone. We use very light frameworks, which is
Yes. That one is not number treated like
yeah. Backbone is light, but we are having a very, because we in our application don't use, we heavily use services. We create models out of
But if
that
you are using
services.
any IOC, okay, I think this is a different topic now, maybe which I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so like in Singleton, like we have like I said, we have order service. Okay, that when you initialize the order service, okay, or maybe like a facility module. So we in there is something called facility, like for managing inventory, you need to have separate warehouse.
No,
So
no,
what?
I'm not questioning singleton usage.
Okay.
What I'm saying is why there is a singleton service manager. So basically, if you have an IOC already, the service or the component or the bean, whichever you might call it, so it can manage itself to be a singleton. I mean, it doesn't need another service manager.
Exactly. The point is, like, if you have a class, let me explain that. If you have a class, you can create directly object, okay? But what if the class requires some data? Okay, so in that case, there's a wrapper. So that see that when the request for creating a singleton object came, then it instances a class object, and then it while that class order detail class return a promise, and it watch whether it is written or not. So it is not returning the promise. See, like order detail has a promise, okay, but the what do you say? The tab do not need that promise. It needs the object. So
Promise is an object, right?
no. The full object itself. So promise is this one part, na.
Okay.
So it has other functions also.
Okay.
Malab,
So you wrap promise in another object.
yeah.
So,
Maybe we can go through the. I'll
I
explain.
wanted to talk after the.
Yeah, I opened this code also. You'll get to know.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. So there are a lot of other things also that you can think of. For example, promises versus events, as I mentioned. That if you have a use case where you have to implement some certain thing again and again, which is a recurring, then it's better to use use events instead of promises. What else is promises don't expose a progress API in the EcmaScript 6 specification. So that is something that one might be disappointed to when hearing about it. But yeah, that's the plain truth. So yeah, can't say much about that. So, and these are the different references. I'll surely share my slide with all of you, and you can go through each one of them. This is the draft specification. Apart from that, there is an awesome chapter regarding the implementation with JavaScript promises if you are coming in for the first time. Then there are some general resources that accompany all the libraries in your JavaScript code with the different standards and the particular library as to in what depth it's implementing. And then there are the libraries. Then there's on how you can migrate from jQuery promises to actually using posed by other libraries, for example, Q. Then there is a small where UI interactions that you can do via thinking of having a similar implementation. And yeah, so I didn't want to actually grade as to how one has implemented it, but it's all about learning and then making it a bit better so that the code becomes more readable. And as I said, it's all about making your code more beautiful. So no, as I mentioned in my talk. So yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, about me, it's a small intro. I am senior in Wingify. Wingify now, I love to cook, hack, and travel. I've worked before in SlideShare, now in Director, and now working on VWO. which is our product about tweaking, optimizing, and mobile. Be glad to connect with each one of you, or even refer to that I worked before. So yeah, I mean, glad to have met you, and let's proceed. Yeah, sure. So thanks for your time.